currently we have something that looks a little bit like this. What I do want to kind of make it look like now is something like this. So the first thing we're going to do is just concentrate on this first top line up here. Obviously, if I move my cursor over it kind of disappears. So this is the kind of area that I want to look at, this top line. So how do I go about making this top line? Well, at the moment, we just have one image being drawn. We have our destination and our source. So if we want to kind of squeeze this down, all we need to do is change this height. Which one? We've got a 600 here and a 600 here. Well, if I want the destination to be shorter, then I just need to shorten down this height. So instead of this being 600, maybe 100. Let's see how that looks. So this is just a shorter version at the top of the page. Now, of course, what I want to do is actually add a loop of this so that they go down the page instead. So there's two things I'm going to do first of all. The first thing I'm going to do in Draw is add a little bit of space to just draw the background every single time. And the reason for that is I don't want there to be any redrawn pixels. I just want it to be drawn every single frame a little bit differently. So this is the background color #000000. And this needs to be in quotes because this is not a JavaScript thing. It needs to be in kind of air quotes, in actual quotes. So now what we have is something that looks exactly the same. When we start to animate things though, we can start to see things moving properly. For instance, if I just change this 100 that we had from before to something like frame count, what we'll see now is something that gets bigger and bigger and bigger as we scroll down the page. Well, we're not really doing anything apart from this frame count is animating and increasing. Obviously, this will never stop and it will stretch and stretch and stretch. But we have something here that we can actually have a bit of control over now. So the one thing we want to do is actually not just draw one of these things, we want to draw 12. And we don't really want to do things on frame count. We want to do things on maybe something like a tile size. So in here, what is the final tile size? Well, it's going to be 12 things. So we need to do a little bit of maths. So 12 into 600 is 50. So we're going to make a constant called tile size. And this is going to be equal to 50. So because it's going to be 12 in the end. And what we want to do underneath here is we want to make a loop. So we're going to do a for loop, which is going to look like this. So for round brackets, curly brackets. Now this final one is only going to go in one direction. It's going to go down the page. So we don't need an X direction. We're just going to concentrate on the Y direction for this one in particular. So here what we're going to do is let Y equal 0. And then we're going to add a semicolon. We're going to say Y is less than 0 for now. We'll go and change it in a second. And then what we're going to do is say Y is equal to Y plus 1. So we've got a start, an end, and a step. So it increases by 1 every single time until it gets to 0. But because it's 0, this loop never runs. If I open this up right now and write any code in here, nothing will happen because this loop doesn't have an endpoint. If I want this to run once, I change this to 1. If I want to run it 12 times, I change this to 12. So at the moment, our image is just outside of this. So at the moment, this code in here never runs. There's nothing inside here, even though it's running 12 times. So we still have the same thing as before. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this for now. There it goes. And basically put this image being drawn inside the loop 12 times. So what we're going to do now is say image for this graphic is going to be what? Well, let's do it as the same place as before. We'll say 0, 0, 1200. And now what we'll do is say 100 for now. We'll change it a little bit later, of course. And then we'll do 0, 0, and then the same start and end. So what we'll have now is something that looks like this. There's 12 being drawn at exactly the same place. Now, from previously, this felt like overkill when I started putting more variables and changeability in this. So what I'm going to do is the same as what we did in the last few projects. We're going to make some things go in here instead. What we're going to do is we're going to start by taking this and making it into a constant. So we'll start with what? Well, we're going to start with the source, X. So this is going to be equal to 0 and source Y is going to be equal to 0. Basically, we want to take this original image, which looks like this, and just copy and paste it from 0, 0 all the way to this bottom corner. So again, we need this width SW. It's going to be that wide, and this SH is going to be 6 100. And similar to before, what is the destination of this? Well, if I want to draw what we had in the last video, I would say the destination of this in the X direction is 0 as well. And the endpoint is also 0. And our width is always going to be 1200. And our height is always going to be 600 for now. So this stuff isn't being used yet. It isn't in this stuff. So I'm actually going to replace it piece by piece. The first number is always going to be dx. The second number is going to be dy. And then we're going to do dw, dh. And then the last four are always going to be the source. So this original part, sx, sy, sw, sh. Now, of course, what we'll see is what we had to begin with, which is OS. There's actually 12 things being drawn here. But what we can start to play with now is some of these numbers. So instead of this source, what I want to do is almost like tile this up. So what we're going to do is 12 tiles. So what we're going to start to change is the height. So which one do we need to change? Well, what we want to change first of all is this kind of endpoint. We want this endpoint to look like tile size. So this is just going to be 50 tall. So now we should get what we had just before. There's 12 of them in different places. We want to kind of list them down the page. So what we're going to change is this one over here. So we're going to go down the page depending on the Y. So Y times tile size. So it's not always at the same place Y down the page. We have this going into position. So now what we have is we've gone from this original source into something that looks kind of pretty wide. So now we had something that started over here, and now we've gone to something that starts over here. So how do we start to talk about going between the two? Like, how do we even go about this? We'll talk about that in the next video.